Welcome. My name is Dr. Chris McKnight. I'm the head of the Division of Geriatric Medicine. And welcome to the 16th annual Kathryn and Weldon public lecture on Alzheimer's disease. Kathryn and Weldon was a native of New Brunswick, graduate of Mount Allison University, a successful business person who was on the board of directors of the Dalhousie Medical Research Foundation. She was also one of Canada's representatives to the International Organization of Manufacturers, and while there set up programs regarding the International Year of the Woman. In her will, she left money to the Dalhousie Medical Research Foundation to fund research in 3 areas, one of which was Alzheimer's disease. And they, in partnership with the Alzheimer's Society of Nova Scotia and the estate of Jennifer Cubitt, set up the Kathryn and Weldon Research Chair in Alzheimer's disease. That was announced in 1999. Dr. Rockwood was the first holder and still holder. What a research chair is, it's a tool that a university uses to attract the best and brightest researchers, provide them stable funding so that they can do research in important areas such as Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Rockwood is one of the world's leading experts in Alzheimer's disease. He has an international reputation. He has a very busy research and clinical career here in Nova Scotia. And he's going to speak to us on, do we have to wait 20 years to prevent dementia? Dr. Rockwood.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone, for showing up, for figuring, nah, I don't really have a life. Friday night, let's go talk about Alzheimer's disease. Yeah, that'll be good. So, but I do thank you all for showing up. This is a really important topic, and it's something that we need a better public understanding of, and we need a better public policy understanding of, because we're right at the beginning right now of a long forecast challenge to any society in which people age. And that challenge is that many people, as they age, will develop dementia. So I want to start off and talk a little bit about what that is. And we're going to kind of lay some groundwork here. And then I want to talk about what the title means. And then I want to talk a little bit about what the personal response to this, I think, reasonably would be. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about what the public policy response to this should be, because we're at a distance right now from where we need to be. And the default way that we're going about it is going to be both ineffective and very expensive. So we can do better, and we need to, and it's within our grasp. Because very often around here we say, oh, we got to take money, we don't have any money, we got tons of money, we're spending tons now. We got to spend the money in a sensible, organized, focused way. So the challenge is that dementia and age pretty much go together. Not for every individual, but the risk goes up. The risk to develop dementia goes up as people age. And so when we have a society that is aging, for sure it will be the case that an important number of people there will get dementia. So it works more or less like this. First of all, let's understand what that word is. Dementia is a situation a person finds themselves in which their impairment in memory and thinking, and generally we call this cognition, is severe enough that it interferes with their social or occupational functioning. So there's lots of hairs to split in there. So one of them is, I talked a little bit about memory, and for many people, the memory impairment is important. On the other hand, lots of people have memory impairment which doesn't really interfere with things. I know the people who work with me find it extremely charming when I can't find my keys and show up late to things and so on. I'm sure they're very happy with that entirely. So there's some things that we know seem to go with aging but don't in and of themselves portend or seem to be linked to or forecast the development of dementia. Now again, almost everything I'm going to say, any single sentence is going to be controversial. And there's some folks out there who are working very hard to say, well, if you ever forgot your keys, your risk goes up, and so on. And, God bless them, but that really isn't where the data suggests that we are going, nor is it a responsible use of time and effort from my standpoint. I think it's fine to understand what the very first symptoms might be, but to extrapolate that to everybody who might have that symptom is a whole different thing. So the first hair I want to split is not everyone with memory impairment has dementia. Most everyone, but not everyone, but most everyone with dementia has memory impairment. That's because the most common cause of Alzheimer's disease, now this is the party line. I don't think this is actually true. We'll talk about this in a bit. But the most common cause of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. So people with Alzheimer's disease will have dementia, but not everyone with dementia will have Alzheimer's disease because there's other things that can cause it too. So you can see how we're barely started and it's getting complicated already. But this thing called dementia increases the chance of a person having it, goes up from being very uncommon under the age of 65, very, very uncommon, to by the time age 85 comes on, being about every other person, a number like that. And intriguingly, that proportion doesn't really seem to plateau. So even people who are at 100 have been doing fine, the chance they're going to get to 105, well, the chance they're going to get 105 is very, very small. Let's get this straight too. So most people vastly overestimate how long they're going to live. So it's very, very uncommon to arrive at the age of 95. It's less common still to arrive at the age of 100. And statistically, you could cut off the distribution at 100 years and you'd have, and you wouldn't make a difference with this. There's a thing called the maximum lifespan expectancy, which is about how long 99.9% of the people will live, and it's about 100 years, even though one person lived to be 122. These things are very uncommon. But the point is that over the age even of 100, the chance to get dementia still seems to go up. So there must be something fundamentally going on with aging if there's no slacking off of the risk. So we start off, and it's very, very uncommon. By 85, it's about every other person will have it to some extent. And it just keeps going up. So it must be the case that as a population ages, we need to prepare for dementia. Now the second thing you're going to speak reasonably sensitively about dementia at all is it's not all or none. It's not all or none. There are grades of it. And even without treatment, you'll have some people who have a very mild problem, and others a mild and a moderate, severe, and finally a very severe problem. And mostly we can get a snapshot of how the staging works based on the things that a person is having trouble with. Some of the very mild stages of Alzheimer's disease, for example, may have some problems with doing things they've always been able to do, but now it's just really, really tough for them. And famously, it will be things like getting the taxes done. So that, they're not just putting it off a bit more or hoping the accountant will get round to it or some sort of a magical wish thing. They actually are having real trouble to do that. Now, it's not everyone who has trouble with their taxes has very mild Alzheimer's. Some people have just been watching too much American TV, right? Taxes, no, I can't have that. But it is the case that it's those high order functions where in very mild Alzheimer's, people have problems with that. As the disease progresses, then they get into the mild stage. In the mild stage, they have problems with things like driving, probably the bugbear of anyone in our trade, driving, in men, worse. But also things like handling their medications, being able to do more complicated bits of shopping, and so on and so on. And then that will advance right through to a severe stage in which they have problems just with being able to get dressed, and ultimately with having to feed themselves, and ultimately with being able to walk around. And that's the spectrum. And so a goal in the treatment or in the prevention of Alzheimer's is not just to prevent the onset, but to prevent the progression of the disease itself. Because mild Alzheimer's, mild treated Alzheimer's, is actually not that bad a state. And many people in that state live very productive and fulfilling and happy lives in which they engage with other people. So when we see patients in the clinic, one of our goals is to slow the disease progression and to slow it in the most important ways, such that people can spend more time in the mild stage. Because a brutal fact of the trade in dementia is that we take advantage of the relationship between dementia and aging, because something else, the risk of something else goes up with age and doesn't cut off. Anyone know what that is? Anyone shout it out? Death. So one of the things in my trade is we look forward to the good death, that someone with Alzheimer's can live in a state in which the disease has not progressed that much and they die of something else. And that's an actual fact of the way we start to think about these things. And this is part of the reason that we need a public conversation. Because if someone has mild Alzheimer's disease, death is not the worst outcome. My dad said there's lots of things worse than dying. Dying is not the bad thing. So we need to start to have conversations that exist in that space where people can use that as a way to start to talk and think about it and talk to their friends and talk to their loved ones and engage in the conversations that make it more likely they can achieve a good death than if they just hope for the best. Because our system, we have quite a good system. We have a very particularly good healthcare system. If you got one thing wrong, if you're really acutely ill, this is a great place. I've just spent a week working in the emergency department, and we saw some compelling things that all our group, the whole crowd of the young people who were there, we were just proud to be part of that. It was so good. But at the same time, we also saw people who showed up in whom, despite their age and despite the number of things they had wrong with them, they never really had much of a talk about death. They were hoping, if they didn't talk about it too much, well, no one's going to say it wouldn't happen, but still, kind of wouldn't happen, right? So you don't want to be forecasting and talking about it. But that's going to change. We have to have these conversations. That's one of the goals of the Weldon lecture series, is to help us engage in conversations like this. And the other thing that is important to talk about before we get into the main part of the talk, do we have to wait 20 years? The other thing to talk about is this idea about the heritability of dementia. Am I going to get it if my parents had it? Am I going to get it if no one in the family had it? And it's tricky, and the evidence of this is changing in the last while. And the answer seems to be about this. The chance to get Alzheimer's goes up with aging. So some of what we see in terms of Alzheimer's that runs in families, particularly when it happens after the age of 80, it's been really difficult to sort out where the genes work. Do the genes work in order to get you dementia if you live that long, or do they work to allow you to live that long in the first instance? So the general rule of thumb is that if you have a parent who's had dementia, that about doubles whatever your chance is. So when you're young, you've got almost no chance. You get twice that, still almost no chance. But the older you get, the more important it is to know whether you've had parents who have developed dementia. So for some people, the risk is fairly high. And it's on that basis, as high, particularly if they're going to live a long time. So it's on that basis I want to turn to this question. Do we have to wait 20 years to prevent dementia? And I'm an academic, and my answer is maybe. But I hope not. So here's what I mean by that. Maybe means I don't know. And, people don't, as far as I can tell. I hope not, because I'm not just a scientist, I'm a doctor too, and we're saps for things like that. So the argument about waiting 20 years runs like this. It says the seeds laid down for the development of dementia, not just the seeds laid down, the active process, the sprouting of them, the unfolding of them, the leaves coming out on them, happens about 20 years before the dementia itself happens. So in the memory clinic, where Dr. McKnight and several of my colleagues' work, including Dr. Darvish there at the back, about whom more shortly. Those seeds that we see in full blossom, that we see with dementia, they're about 20 years old. That process has been going on for quite a while. And that means that if you really, really wanted to defeat Alzheimer's, you should go back to that process about 20 years ago and just nip that seed in the bud. So it turns out for a bunch of reasons, I don't think that's a very likely strategy by trying to tackle it one bad protein at a time. And so that's the other part of the discussion that we need to have. So at present, there have been literally now hundreds of very expensive late phase trials of drugs that people thought were going to prevent Alzheimer's or going to prevent the expression of the disease, or going to be able to stop it in its tracks, that have not worked. In fact, the last time we had drugs that worked in the treatment of Alzheimer's disease at all was back in the 1990s. And those drugs really opened up a lot of hope, and they opened up a lot of scientific understanding, and they opened up a lot of clinical experience in what treated Alzheimer's can look like. At various talks that I've given here, I've argued that we actually blew a lot of that understanding. We actually haven't appreciated what treated Alzheimer's looks like. We're stuck still in many ways in the model that treated Alzheimer's disease looked just like ordinary Alzheimer's disease, but not quite so far along the path. I come from Newfoundland, so let's just imagine that Newfoundland is perfect cognition. And say if you're going to wind up in, I don't know, New York, that would be dementia. And when we started testing the drugs for Alzheimer's in the 1990s, we seemed to start off with the idea that, well, you've left Newfoundland. Maybe if you're lucky, we'll stop it just after you get off the ferry. You'll hang up in Cape Breton. That's pretty good. It's almost like Newfoundland. And we can just stop right there and we live happily ever after. And then people say, well, it might not be there. You might be off to, New Brunswick. Well, New Brunswick is not a bad place to be. And then, well, maybe Maine, then down to the Boston States. But this idea at some point we'd stop and you just hold it there. And maybe if you're really lucky, you'd stop in Boston and start going back up to Nova Scotia. In other words, we thought that the things that were expressed as dementia could be arrested and even reversed. And that what would happen as the disease got treated successfully is we would rewind that process of the way that it got worse. And that cannot possibly be true. But I'm not going to talk more about that. Except to say this. It's likely that even successfully prevented Alzheimer's disease will not be the same as normal cognition. It's likely that successfully prevented Alzheimer's will be a new state that we haven't seen yet, that we need to describe and understand and celebrate and say, this new place that we've got, new St. John's, whatever it is, is this a nice place? Do you like to live here? Is it pretty good? Is the weather as good as it is in St. John's? Or could it be even better than that? I don't know. So we haven't spent a lot of time trying to understand what the target is. And that's a pragmatic challenge. Because if you don't exactly know where it is you're trying to get to, it's hard to understand whether you're there or not. So you can say, well, we've left St. John's, that's clear. We're not in New York, that's good. This other place, it's foreign. Now what are we going to do? So that's the optimistic scenario that we've got hope. I think we can build on a lot of the work that's been done in many parts of the world to help us understand better what it is we're going to look for. But those are amongst the many, many pragmatic challenges in front of us right now if we're going to take on and take seriously the idea that we can prevent Alzheimer's. So what I'm saying to you is I expect prevented Alzheimer's is still going to have memory problems. I expect they won't be as bad as they are right now, but they may be qualitatively different. I don't know that they may be different in ways that we don't really get right now. It may not be a thing we've seen before because we've never had this combination of new things to look for. And my great shock, my great fear is that we're going to miss an effective drug because we didn't know we had it in our hands. I believe I've actually seen that happen once, many years ago in the 1990s. The drug called propentophyline, for those of you who want to know, that actually was helpful. And it worked for many people, but not for all. And I think that that's going to be another pragmatic challenge, is how do we work out drugs that work for many people? So there will be a lot of work that needs to be done, and it will need to be done over a period of time that's longer than the way we do drug trials now. You can't do a drug trial for 20 years. Like, no one would fund it, no one would take it. When you go into a trial and say, well, you might not get anything for 20 years and so on. So that's not going to happen. There are designs, however, that would allow someone to say, here's an endpoint that you don't want. You can stay in the trial to the point that you get that, and then at that point we'll switch you over to something else. And there are designs that could work in that way. And every time there's an innovation like that, that brings about a pragmatic challenge. The challenge is that the regulators want to be sure that a trick isn't being played. The regulators want to be sure that you're doing this in a way that will still allow you to make a rational decision about whether this treatment is worth it at all or not. And this is proving to be a really important obstacle. And in a way where we're seeing the worst outcomes, polarization of opinion, very conservative decision-making, small c conservative, decision-making that's not as risk-taking as it needs to be because of a need for certainty, which might or might not be there. So that's going to be one really important part of the challenge. And that's just going at it one protein at a time. The dominant theory of Alzheimer's disease right now, so first let me say, there's agreement. I don't think anyone would disagree. It's completely in the mainstream of scientific opinion that what we see in the clinic, what we see as dementia, what we see as Alzheimer's disease that has expressed itself to impair cognition and function, is the reflection of process that's been going on for years and years and years, probably decades, probably a couple of decades anyway. That's completely in the mainstream. Now I'm going to tell you something that's not in the mainstream, but which I believe to be true. I don't think that you can cure Alzheimer's disease one single protein abnormality at a time. And so I think part of the reason that we haven't gotten where we want to be has been that we put a lot of eggs in one basket. And that basket has been the basket of a protein called the amyloid protein. Now, there's good reason. It's not a stupid bet. People aren't wrong or not intelligent or anything like that. It's just, as a general principle of investment, you should invest diversely. Although, first of all, let me say, I know I'm a doctor talking about money, and that's never a good thing. What they say in the financial investment world, a doctor and his money are soon parted. But still, as a general principle, it's defensible to say that you need a broad investment base. And we haven't done that. We've gotten infatuated with the notion of cure, which I believe to be wrong-headed. And it's a cultural phenomenon that has led us to that state. Be that as it may, that's where we are right now. At the end, I'm going to say what Canada can do about this, the role that Canada can have in terms of a diverse investment portfolio for the world. By the way, that's why I'm laying down this seed right now. So, and I'm not going to talk much more about that. I do want to say one thing, and Lindsay Wallace is here. Sorry, yes. Really, really great PhD student working with me, and we've just had some work accepted at a big prestigious journal. I can't say more about it because it's not out yet. Which I think persuasively makes the case that there is more to Alzheimer's disease than the abnormal proteins that we've thought. And the other stuff I'm going to talk about now are really important in this too. So what are the other things? The other things are, interestingly, stuff that goes along with aging. So when we talk about aging, we need to get some ideas right. I'm sorry for this, but this is how scientists think, right? Aging, what do you mean by aging? So what we don't mean by aging is the passage of time. Time arises as a consequence of the things that need to accumulate for it to have happened, but aging, strictly speaking, amongst the people who are into this, aging is an increase in the mortality rate. And that isn't always the same as the passage of time. So let me give you the clear example. So if we look at people who were born in 1900, way back then, and looked at their risk of death, it fell very sharply to the age of 15, because back in those days, the death rate for wee babies, and their moms too, but the death rate for the wee babies was very high, and it fell down to about the age of 15, and it started to go up again. So that falling in the age, that falling in the mortality rate meant that they weren't actually aging. And that's why technically still in the world these days, the term we use for that period is development, and aging starts after that. So what goes on with aging? So, many good, happy things, people get wise and blah, blah, blah. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the more biological things. So it's been generally worked out in the last couple of decades what the most important events at the level of the molecules in the cells are. And there's not just one thing. And those things all happen in everybody. They happen, though, to varying extents, right? So even yoga practicing, vegan eating, Birkenstock wearing people who are out jogging, happen to them too, right? So it happens to everybody. It happens at varying rates, and those things look like they themselves are implicated in ways that we don't quite understand with regards to the development of late life dementia. And the reason I think this is very straightforward and should not be as controversial as it has been, Lindsay and I know, and other people who work with me know, is that there is more than one thing happening. There has to be. It goes with aging. Aging is the most important risk we've got for dementia. I said it at the top. It's very, very common. Dementia, very, very common under the age of 65, and the majority case, some part over the age of 85. So aging has to be important. So what goes on with aging? All these other things. But the hope in this is that if we can do anything to interrupt those other things that happen, we can start to get at why dementia occurs, at least in the way that it does. Out of the many things that happen with regards to aging, I want to draw to your attention one thing. So cells divide, they keep on going. That's how we get skin. You break your skin, new skin comes back, right? Cellular division going on, your gut, everything, perfect. Some cells don't divide more than others, and so on. People lose their hair and such. But nevertheless, for the most part, it works out. But some cells, as part of aging, for reasons we don't understand, they stop dividing. There's a term for this called cellular senescence. Some cells aren't working. They've stopped. And the reason that's important is because they don't just stop and sit quietly and be ashamed, like you think they should. They're like raging again. No, it can't be. And they make wee proteins and molecules and stuff like that they secrete. And these things that they secrete are harmful for the cells around them. They're the rotten apples that spoil the barrel. And it turns out that our understanding of this has advanced remarkably in the last 10 years or so. And it turns out that we now have ideas, and there's the demonstration, at least in mice, of things that can be done to arrest the cell cycle arrest process, to stop the cell cycle arrest process, or at least to stop it from elaborating all these bad toxic things. And that's just one instance of a whole bunch of things that are going on right now very actively getting at the process of aging. So I think that it's been really disappointing what's happened with that whole other amyloid, the amyloid protein story. But we can be optimistic because there's this whole other range of ways to attack it, ways to get at it. And my hope is that we haven't right now exhausted pharma who've spent tens of billions of dollars on that strategy. We haven't kind of turned them off looking at dementia at all. I don't think we will because it's so much money that's involved. On the other hand, that money's going to come from us. There's going to be tough times ahead to try and chart our way through this. But at least, let's worry about those things down the line. Right now, let's think about, is there a way forward? And I think that there is. It's not clear at all that you got to wait 20 years for that to happen. That was me trying to stop myself from going on and on. But here I am on and on, not only part way through. Sorry. So the idea is that we have a way, we have the prospect of ways that we can bring about new drugs and target new drugs in ways that could be effective and that wouldn't take 20 years. So that's all I'm going to say about that. There's realistic hope, I expect, from a whole different way to think about this problem. There are other whole different ways to think about this problem that still fit in the area of traditional science, and there are 2 chairs in Alzheimer's research funded by the Dalhousie Medical Research Foundation, and the other chair is the Sobe Chair. And Dr. Sultan Darvish, I'm going to wave to the crowd here now, is the holder of the Sobe Chair. And he knows as much about a particular set of brain functions that are related to a certain set of chemicals in what's generally called the cholinergic nervous system. He knows as much as anyone in the world. Right? We're absolutely honored and privileged to have someone with such great in-depth expertise here. And I'll tell you something else. He has stuck with this understanding. He has understood more and more. He looked at it in more and more detail. He's elaborated new information around it, new knowledge, for years and years and years, even when everybody else is saying, look, oh, amyloid, let's run over to amyloid. No, I've got a new thing about amyloid. And anything you want to say about anything good at all, no, amyloid's got to show how it relates there. He's stuck that out. You can do that at a place like Dow. You can do it because we're not so big that we got, 10,000 people. We can direct, you go here and you go there. We got a couple of folks standing around, a half dozen people doing stuff, a dozen sort of folks who want to do a thing. Let them do it, right? We don't have the ability to interfere. But that's the thing we should celebrate. As a matter of public policy, we should think about the way we're funding research in this part of the world, in Nova Scotia, in ways that we don't oblige people to be part of the mainstream. We can say, you can come and work out this idea here. And I think in a small way, that points the way for Canada. So Canada right now has announced, well, it signed up to, years ago, when it was the G8, that's how long ago it was, it signed up to a dementia strategy. All the countries of the G8, now the G7, got together and they said, we're going to tackle dementia. The Americans said, we're going to have a curative treatment by 2020, because they're Americans and they just go at it. But they've put money into it. They've gone from $627 million a year to $1.3 billion a year to $2 billion a year, and now there's been the announcement of another $300 million, $2.3 billion US dollars is where they're going to be next year in this commitment. Poor old Britain, they've made a big commitment too. So has France. So have the other countries, for the most part, in the G7. Where are we? So there's a thing called the Canadian Consortium on Neurodegeneration and Aging, of which I am the associate director. And when we started off some years ago, we were told we're going to get $100 million. This would be fantastic. People said, $100 million is not enough. We said, maybe it's not enough, but it's way more than what we got right now. You may have heard the expression, Tory times are tough times. That wound up being $22 million by the time it was done. Not done yet, over 5 years. They said, well, there'll be money from the private sector and so on and so on. And that money got put in and got taken out, then it got spent. So in the end, over 5 years, we put in about $29 million. $6 million a year. How on earth are we going to compete? How on earth are we going to make our contribution with $6 million a year? So now we have the sunny ways, and now we're going through the same thing again, it seems to me. Well, it'll be 50. Well, not quite 50. It'll be, 47. If you count the stuff we've already announced and put it in that way and so on, and if you can get these other partners in, and so I don't know where we're going to land up, but it's nowhere where we need to be. It's nowhere where we need to be. And if we took that money and said, hey, we'll race after amyloid too, we'll chase the Americans, that's not going to work. So we as a group of people, scientists across the country, trying to figure out the best way to come up with a strategic investment that would actually make a difference. And right now, where the thinking is converging is on dementia prevention. Dementia prevention. And the approach that we're going to take is not so much we're going to find a new molecule, not even in the aging bit. We're all standing around saying, look at the aging work, look at that going on over there. Isn't that fantastic? We're trying to uplift people with that. But we're thinking about how dementia might work, how dementia prevention might work, if we looked at the things that we can do right now that look in some way like they're important to moderate the effects of aging. So that's what I want to talk about now. This is the second last thing. The last thing is going to be, I'm going to talk as carefully as I can about what I think our province should do. But what we're trying to do in Canada is we're going to be part of a worldwide consortium, because we've got to leverage the money somehow. I mean, hey, it was great. I talked to the folks from the U.S. who reviewed some of the work, and they said, $50 million a year. Well, no, look carefully. It's not $50 million a year. It's $50 million over 5 years. And they're like, we have single competitions for things that are worth more than $50 million, right? How can you possibly... Anyway, so we said we're going to be part of a worldwide consortium that's going to look at the best ways to prevent dementia. And the best ways to prevent dementia are, can anyone take a guess? Anyone's been to these talks before? Diet, exercise, right? And death. Hey, the good news is, all right. Sleep, yeah, well, a little bit. Socialization, yeah, the big three. So here's the news. Here's the news to share this time about those things. I've talked about all those things in the past. Here's the news to share. In the past, we've made all the inferences about how big that effect is based on the observational studies that were done. The best thing we've got. There will not be a 20-year trial of exercise. Not going to happen. So we've looked observationally at people who've exercised, and we looked at their risk, and we've compared that to the risk of people who don't exercise. And it looks like we've overestimated the extent to which exercise is going to be helpful. On the other hand, it still is. And on the other hand, the effect size is big enough that you could assemble a group of about 30 people or so, and the 30 people who exercise, 30 people who did not, you could, without a lot of expertise, just look at them and say, well, that must be the group that has the dementia, and this is the group that does not. So it's not small, but it's not a guarantee for any individual. So it's not big, but it's not a guarantee for any individual. And likewise, we've probably underestimated the effect of diet, because it's been hard to get people to go on diets for a long time and stick with it and all that sort of stuff. So the trials now that come in look like diet may turn out to be as important as exercise. I was just talking to a group of folks about this who know it really, really, really well. Not me, right? So I mean, I have expertise in some things, but in order to get up and stand in public, you got to be kind of a mile wide and inch deep. So I'm always careful when I start talking about stuff I don't really understand, like things that I do. But I can tell you that intelligent people of goodwill looked at it carefully can make a compelling argument on data that I may not understand every bit of part of the argument, but I can appreciate how the data work. The data seem to point to an important impact of diet. And then the social engagement piece appears to be particularly important. Now, it's tricky because some element of what happens if your ability to engage socially is also tied up with the most important thing generally from an observational standpoint, from a social standpoint, that will keep the risk of dementia low. Anyone know what that is? Education. And not just education, but maintaining an active, engaged lifestyle. Talking to your friends, not just talking to them, not gossiping, having debates, having things that stretch your mind in some way, learning a musical instrument, learning a new language, like things that really rock the brain because it takes work. Who here can recall how long it's been since they had that feeling like you had when you're trying to do math and like, I think I've got it, and you say, my brain hurts. Turns out that my brain hurts. This has been looked at, a very clever paper published about 2 years ago. That feeling that my brain hurts is associated with a huge degree of activation of your brain function. And so it's not your brain that hurts, it's you're feeling exhausted because it takes up so much energy for this to be done. And it's hard. And it's hard to get your focused concentration. If you can say, yeah, I did that in the last 6 weeks, 6 months, year and a half anyway, then that's a good thing. But that's the level of effort that it takes. And the strategy we're going to take in Canada, we're not going to say, well, it must be exercise, or well, it must be social things. What are we going to say? We're going to say, well, they're both right. You know that joke? Why did the Canadian chicken cross the road? To get to the middle. Right? So that's a strategy that we're going to follow. We're going to have people in the trial who will be doing some of each of these. Some people do one, not others. And some people will get to do both, and so on and so on. And there's really important technical issues about how you understand this work and how you understand a very important principle called blinding and how you make inferences based on the structures with multiple groups. This is non-trivial. And it's the sort of thing that Canadians seem to be particularly good at, in part because we're able to talk to each other. And all the international reviewers who looked at what we're planning to do said, well, I guess Canadians could do it. But I couldn't imagine doing it in our country because it requires a lot of cooperation. So that's true. And so we've tried very self-consciously to leverage the thing that we think we might be good at, even though we are from Canada and we can't be that good. But we're gonna come to play, and we're gonna bring our 100% effort. And so that's the approach that we're going to take. And so the things that I can tell you about how this all works is it just what your mother said, right? That you should eat a balanced diet. Now, intelligent people will have a big debate. They'll rage over what that means. Does it mean carbohydrates and fat, or only carbohydrates? It means a balanced diet. And it means not having too many sweets or too much processed food. That's the one-line summary of it. Exercise, what do you mean by that? It's a disappointing, just like in the Mediterranean diet. So if you want to look up something online, look at the MIND, M-I-N-D, diet, and you'll see it has an enormous, for someone from Newfoundland anyway, an enormous amount of olive oil a week, 1 liter per person per week. I'm serious. And a disappointingly small amount of alcohol. But not none. Because, you try that in Newfoundland, and buddy, get out. So that's where the exercise, the nutrition bit comes in. And the socialization bit really is have someone that you can talk to every day and have someone that you can argue with roughly every couple of weeks. And those things seem to be good for your brain. And I don't think we're going to actually, though there must be a way to leverage this, I don't think we're going to have a language learning component of it, though presumably we should. But I tell you, this won't get in the trial because we don't think we'll get the uptake. But you really want to get serious about it, then you should really look at doing something that will stretch your brain. So those are the key components of what the prevention of Alzheimer's disease is like. If there's anyone in the audience who's here because they're middle-aged, and you've seen your parents with dementia, and you want to know what can you do, you've timed it well. Because the data look like where the damage gets laid down, where the roots of the damage get laid down, is in middle age, which disappointingly is sort of between 30 and 50, 1 or 2 or 3. So if you're somewhere in that range, you got the 20 years that you need. Disease expression in dementia really starts to take off after the age of 75. So, 20 years back from that is 55. But that seems to be where things are timed the best. But one of the things that we know is that it's never too late. And one of the things that the Lancet Commission on Dementia did, and they spent a lot of time looking into this, and a huge amount of effort went into this. And the data looked pretty persuasively like it's never too late to start. But the impact is best if you start it before you need it. It's like a lot of things, right? By the time you need it, you can't have it. But if you get it before you need it, you're okay. So this is the approach that you have to bring to bear with respect to this. So the final thing I want to say is, what can we in this province do? So the first thing that we've got to do is we've got to be ambitious about this. This is going to be a huge challenge. And we got to get over this, oh my God, what are we going to do? It's only us and no money and nothing here, right? Look, no money, nothing to do. So a lot of these things, communities can organize themselves to help with this. Communities can become more dementia friendly. That means you nudge people in exercise. You build ways that you can go out even when it's raining and all that sort of stuff. There's many things that need to be done at the level of doing things that will get about engagement, including social engagement. And we need to start to take that seriously. And we need to use the policy levers that we have at hand to aid in that. So if there's certain things that would be very hard for an individual to do, but if a group of them came together and they could do it and they get a tax break for it or whatever you're going to do, we should start to think about those things as an investment. We need to have a hard look at the way we're spending money now. So right now we spend a lot of money in long-term care, which is very much based on hospitals and institutions and work organizations that are not flexible and all those things. We need to have that conversation. Because these are the good old days. And it's barely sustainable now. In the way we're doing it now, we have to think about doing things in a new way. Who here has heard about emergency department crowding? Who here has not heard about emergency department crowding? So we know that emergency department crowding is not the emergency department. It's what they call in the trade exit block. Exit block means long-stay patients in acute care hospitals, for the most part. But what people don't seem to appreciate is that the single biggest way to become a long-stay patient in acute care hospital is to have dementia, never get it diagnosed, never get it treated, never make a plan. If you diagnose it, then there's a chance of treatment and a chance of a plan. So there's lots of things right now that are actually impinging on what we do right now that are costing us tons of money that are about dementia. We don't recognize it as such. And we're trying to say, well, we got no money for dementia stuff because we got all this money we're paying the other way. And that's what dementia is. Long-term care is mostly about dementia. So we need to rejig our understanding of what we're facing. And that part of that is going to be a conversation. And that conversation got to start somewhere. And you're all intelligent people of goodwill. We can start the conversation. Go poke someone. Say, I went thing last night. What he was talking about was how we're spending a lot of money on dementia right now. We're spending it in the least effective way imaginable. Well, we could burn it, I guess, but other than that, right? Yeah, burn it for heat. Yeah. So I think we need to get this conversation going. And we need to start thinking about the ways in which it will manifest. And we need to start challenging ourselves with respect to our understanding. And I think that is the sort of stuff that our province can do. I think there's going to be lead groups. I think the university is a natural lead group. The DMRF has shown great leadership. It needs to push that more. I think that when we've got things that seem to be working well, that we should push that more. If it was up to me, I'd say the Darvish Lab, here's a guy looking at something that's really unique and really impressive with a huge body of work behind it. It just hasn't caught on in the pharma-ish way yet. So let's make an investment there. Let's be the 10 millionth people going in, make an investment in the little tiny part of beta amyloid someone's talking about this week. That'll make it all work. Let's take some risk on things like that. I think that's the way we need to think about these issues. Let's look at the money we're spending right now in a very ineffective way and let's name it and let's see what we can do about it. Let's try and problem solve around that. So the leadership also needs to come from the Nova Scotia Health Authority. It needs to come from people who've got a stake in it. And that, I think, includes the long-term care sector. That includes the part of the long-term care sector which is benefiting right now very nicely from the way we organize things. That's not going to be sustainable. That will not last. Be the people out in front of making the change. Don't be the people trying to resist it all the way through. That's the sort of attitude we need to bring to bear with respect to this. It crosses all party lines. Dementia crosses all party lines. So, I want to talk about two other things that have to do with this. One of the things I know from doing work in dementia is that we've got to do work on aging if we're going to make any headway with this. It turns out work on aging is something that we do well here. There's a ton of people who are doing well on this. We need to make that an investment. Recently, the university made it an investment. Apparently, the province didn't. I don't know why. The oldest province in the country. Or maybe PEI beat us out that year, so we don't have to worry about it. So why aren't we making that investment? The other thing that I want to point out is this. In my clinic, I know that if I see someone, we start them on treatment. We diagnose them with dementia, we start them on treatment. And it's more than just one thing. We try and pay attention to all things I talk to you about. We start them on treatment. And if in 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 weeks, there's a palpable, visible difference in that person, not a group of 30 of them, but in that person, then we're on the right track. And I also know that if I'm 8 months in and I'm going for the third of the drugs that are around and we're trying to see why they got that rash on the vitamin and stuff like that, I know that's going to be a much harder thing. That reflects a general principle in the way that complex systems work. And the general principle is that the rich get richer. People who do well early are going to do well the entire way through. The person's done really well at the start, you think, well, the impairment's kind of mild and so on. You get a lot better chance of helping them than the person who really, really needs help because nothing has worked. That's a fact. That's the way these things go. It's within our grasp to make the conditions appropriate that we can have more people in this province in the right circumstance so that they can do well with respect to treatment. The dementia dialogue is going to increasingly dominate public policy. It has to because it's so expensive and it affects so many people and will affect people that we love and cherish, people we've looked up to it as the leaders. There's no way that this is going to be a hidden thing anymore. Let's get the conversation going now. Let's start to think about it. Let's remember we're in the good old days. Let's not look back and say, if only. Let's think about the ways in which we can make a big difference. So I have one more slide to show here, which is the acknowledgements. I've been really fortunate over my career to work with outstanding people, be funded by outstanding groups. I thank all of them for their support, and I thank you for listening. Thank you very much. We've left time for questions, and we have people with microphones.
Okay, so I'm going to read these aloud to you. The first question is, what about the ketogenic diet and burning ketones instead of carbs? Is it better for brain health?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it looks like there are circumstances under which a ketogenic diet helps brain function, and the evidence for this is best in epilepsy. The evidence is very incomplete with regards to dementia, but I want to put out a specific caution here. So the ketogenic diet is based on an important idea about the way that the brain cells handle energy. So the brain is a heavily energy-dependent organ. It gets about 25% of blood flow for about 8% of the body weight. And that's how it should be. It requires a lot of energy. In a network in Canada, it can't have 25%. Maybe it should have like 15%. That wouldn't be fair for it to get it. Anyway, I'm being bad now. Sorry. So I want to draw three things to attention. Number one is that there is some evidence for it. As a general idea. Number two is that there isn't a lot of good evidence for it with respect to Alzheimer's disease. And the third thing is the ketogenic diet is sometimes the stalking horse by which coconut oil gets in the door or seeps in under the transom. And the problem is, so it gets complicated. You have to use words like medium chain triglycerides and all that sort of stuff. And the idea is that there are good things that would go with a ketogenic diet that are spelled roughly the same as some of the things found in coconut oil, but they're only about 1 or 2% that's there. And in order to assemble something that would look like the promise of a ketogenic diet in an oil form, it can be done, but it's not readily available. So ketogenic diet may make a certain amount of sense, but we don't know that because we don't have the studies on it. And the things that you might go to the health food store and buy will not guarantee you're going to get the thing that will deliver the ketogenic diet. It's a very active area of research. I can tell you that in the trial that we're thinking about doing, hopefully we get the money to be part of the trial, we're going to look at that as one of the arms. But securing the compound that would allow us to test this is really, really tricky. And that's, people who understand it very, very well are having trouble with it. So I think the idea you go get it from some store somewhere is not very likely in the near term.
Okay, there's a couple other questions here about diet. What about the blue zone diet to prevent dementia? And
no. So only to the extent that it looks like the Mediterranean diet. I mean, the good thing about the blue zone diet is people eat fish. That's a good thing. We should be behind that. But supplemental fish oils, not a lot of data with regards to that. It looks like if they are going to be there, they're best done as part of the diet, not as part of the supplement. If you're going to have supplement at all, you need to eat the whole fish. If it's going to work, it's a tricky area.
And the last question here is, how does diabetes relate to dementia risk?
So, actually, that's a great question. So there's two ways to answer it. One is there are specific ways that it relates to the dementia risk because diabetes, in various ways, will reduce the blood supply to the brain, and that'll be bad. But the other thing is, the other way to think about the diabetes, it's one other thing that happens as people get older, and they accumulate things wrong. Each of us as we age is saying we have all this stuff that goes on, but it doesn't express itself in terms of our cells, or at least not in ways that we can see. It expresses itself in terms of the illnesses that befall people, or the problems that they have. And I want to be really, really careful here, because I'm not saying that just because you're grouchy means you got an illness, but it does mean the tendency to be grouchy, which increases with age, has been looked at. I can quite study. That is reflecting a process in the brain whereby certain brain chemicals aren't working in you as well as they used to, because you used not to be grouchy, and look at you now. So a lot of things accumulate with age that give rise to problems, and diabetes is one of those. We know it's important because it's so common, it's been looked into. Other things are not quite as common and still bad for you. What that boils down to is the best way to avoid dementia is to be as healthy as possible for as long as you can, in whatever way that takes. And how's that going to play out? Exercise, diet, social engagement.
Other questions?
Yes, I'd like to know about the CBD oil.
Yeah, so I'd like to know that too. I mean, so again, if there's something that Canada should invest in right now, we should be like the world's super duper leaders in this. We shouldn't be exposing people to a ton of stuff that we don't really know about. Aunt Sally, she had it. My God, she's never as happy. And right? I mean, we really need a good science base. We're going to actually have money for it now. How is it possible that wasn't our single biggest investment first, after the driving while impaired and the insurance and the police and all that sort of stuff? Still, I mean, we should be making substantial. If we're gonna play the game, we should make investment in understanding how it actually works. So I wish I knew, and I think we as Canadians should demand that we do know.
Because they do use that in Israel and other countries, right?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. So I don't know the area well enough, but I do know that we don't have the controlled trials we'd look to that would meet the standard of science that would allow us to say about it, to talk about it in the same way we talk about a ton of other stuff, which is out there. And again, the reason we hard nosed about this is because there's a ton of stuff that looked really like it should work, and when the trials are done, it didn't. You can't. It's really important that we have a scientific method for this.
Number one, thank you.
Very well.
The treat, always. It's one thing I really try to get to every year. It's the way you deliver and what you deliver. So it's this whole area of social engagement. I find the memory clinic just a dynamic place to walk through. And one of the reasons is its size. It's small. Therefore, you are hitting on one another all the time. Something, oh, yeah, I heard this and that. So this social engagement, to me, the area there has to do with caregiving. And it has to do with maximizing opportunities to move into the area of cognitive reserve. Okay? Because the way a lot of caregiving now is done is through person-centered, person-directed. And the old nun study actually has some ideas that translated into modern terms, into now terms. So instead of looking at this was a nun study, so you have 5 prayer times during the day in which your stress reduction is not only low, but you know how to access it. And I'm saying for us, often those 5 are the activities we have. So if those activities are looked at in a different way, and we deliver care in those activities, it creates a research opportunity for us because of the size.
Well, I'll say amen to that. So the idea is that there may be things that are straightforward that are within our grasp, but where we study them, we could demonstrate the ways in which they might work. And the notion of focused thinking or engaging to help other people and doing it in a structured way is good for the care provider as well as the care recipient, I think is very important.
Good evening. I have a question. Wouldn't it be nice if we could flick on our television and we would see a round table discussion involving lots of different kinds of Nova Scotians? And let's start and get moving. We need to have more interaction. I've lived, as you well know, in many countries. And we are very polite as a country, but we can also be very effective. We just need to do it.
I endorse that too.
Yes, I would like, can you hear me?
Yep.
When I turned 80, I found my memory starting to go. Now, all the things you said that you should do, be sociable, eat healthy, go to an exercise class, I've done all that for a long time. The things I'm forgetting are street signs, street names, and people's names when I go to repeat something to someone else. I just can't remember them. So is that just age, or is it dementia? Or do you go and get tested and see if you have dementia? Or
So it's a phenomenon that is increasingly important with age. There's a special category of why we have difficulty with the names of people or things, which is less risky than if we were to forget other things, that particularly if we forget how to do certain things. So the rule of thumb used to be, if you forget your keys, not so bad. If you forget where your key is for, that's pretty bad. So there's this idea about there's an ambient number of things that happen much more commonly, even in really intelligent older adults who are doing well, that appear not to be associated with an increased risk. But the fact of the matter is that as people age, the risk of dementia goes up, and it doesn't seem to stop. Again, it's something else to engage in. Through a thing called the Canadian Study of Health and Aging, I had the opportunity to look at a lot of people in this province over the age of 100 years. And it's great that we have people over the age of 100 years, and many people find some meaning in their lives, but I didn't very often go to that and say, gee, I wish I could be 101 like that person is. Right? Very commonly, it's not a pretty picture at that point. So again, we need to have a careful conversation about that, because it's possible to live a life in which you can't do all the things you used to be able to do and still be happy about it. We don't want to be in a position where people say, well, look at Buddy there. I can't see how he should be happy with that off with his head, right? It's the experience of the individual. That's the important aspect of it. But anyway, those things are not necessarily, you haven't told me anything yet that increases the risk. If you're concerned, you can get your memory tested. There's lots of ways to do it online. There's various other opportunities. it's not clear if that's something, like I'm very, very hesitant to say, well, just go see your doctor. You know, he or she will know, because God knows our doctors are very burdened right now. And memory testing is not the sort of thing that for many of them they find to be very useful unless someone's coming with a very specific concern. And if the concern was, I'm more than 80 years old and I forget the name of the street that I used to be able to go down to when I had to bring it up very quickly, but I can still get down the street and I haven't lost my way, that doctor I think would appropriately say, you know, I haven't heard anything yet that gives me an alarm.
Okay, thank you.
When patients present with Alzheimer's, this lady says that she can't remember names, but every patient doesn't present with those same symptoms. I have a cousin who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 60. She's a banker. If you asked her, and she's 63 now, what 1 and 1 was, she doesn't get a clue. She can't add, she can't subtract. But if you ask her where a 3 is, she'll look at it and she'll tell you it's a 3. And then you'll say, so if you've got 3 pennies and I give you 2 more, how many have you got? She looks at it. She has no, and those were the first symptoms that came up. My question is, when patients present, do they often present with a different set of symptoms depending on what part of the brain is affected?
Yeah, so you're exactly right that depending on the part of the brain that's involved, the symptoms will vary. And that's one of the ways that we understand the type of dementia that someone might have, or the set of causes of dementia that someone might have, depending on whether it's a problem of forgetting, or a problem of language, a problem of behavior, sometimes in terms of the way they walk or move. All of these things can be the first symptoms. It's a tricky business. But it's like everything else. There's the 80-20 rule. So 80% of people will have a fairly restricted range of symptoms. 20% of them will have a much broader range. Yes.
So you mentioned that dementia poses a big challenge for the long-term care sector here in Nova Scotia, and I wonder if you had any thoughts as to sort of what strategies or changes we should be trying to implement in order to rise to the challenge that is dementia in long-term care.
So dementia in long-term care is tricky. I think it's appropriate that for the most part people go into long-term care with dementia when dementia is more reasonably advanced. And I think particularly where we have flexibility is in offering opportunities more than we have now for different environments that people with mild dementia can live in. Some of them are going to be indistinguishable from their own home. Some of them very appropriately are their own home, but their own homes may be designed somewhat differently than we've got right now. And we're building homes right now in this province with stairs outside, as though it's never going to snow, there's never going to be ice, they'll all be fine. People are always going to be able to walk up and down and all sorts of stuff. There's stuff like that we really need to change. If we're going to be looking at things that are dementia friendly, then all of the things that that would qualify for being dementia friendly, so easy access and good wayfinding and hard to get lost and easy to get reminded where you want to be. And if you know that most people are going to wind up in the kitchen, you funnel them through there so you don't have to make decisions about it. Those things are actually going to be good for everybody, whether they're cognitively impaired or not. So this idea of universal design, I think that needs to be looked at much more carefully. It's great to have regulations. We need to have that to prevent abuse. On the other hand, if we stifle the range of innovative responses that we have, we can't then turn around and complain about the fact that everything looks all the same. We set it up like that. I think anyone who's in the trade for any amount of time can walk into a long-term care institution and within 5 minutes know, or sooner than that, this is the sort of place I can imagine winding up. And so we see places within the regulations all operating the same way. And I walk in and say, well, I definitely don't want to be here, but maybe the other people find that very worthwhile. Still, we have a lot of variability that's within the regulations, and we don't have always the flexibility of the processes that we need. So I would think that we need more options, and I think that we have to have something where people can be aware of the options that exist elsewhere and are obliged to implement them, so regulated in some way, or at least that we make sure that people just don't put up a fern and a cat and say, look, I'm the Eden alternative, right? So I think we need many more well worked out, well articulated, truth in advertised options than we have. And hopefully it's going to be a rich area for us. Yes. Oh, sorry, there's one at the back. So that's me looking at you. I can look at the microphone.
Regarding diet, is the human microbiome seen to have or suspected to have a role in preventing dementia?
So people don't know right now. There's a lot of work. It's one of the other things that we're doing in the CCNA that I talked to you about. It's there are certain things that are turning out to be true with regards to the microbiome in terms of the patterns that happen with aging and so on. We've done some work. I don't see people from Northwood here tonight. You want to put your hand up? Yay! Okay, so we've done some work with Northwood on the microbiome and sort of barely scratched the surface on this. It appears to be important, but the other thing that's true about the microbiome is we really don't understand it yet. It seems to be really complicated, and a lot of the ideas that were that have been expressed in terms of how the microbiome works. So the microbiome is all of the stuff that you have in your gut and elsewhere. So here's the big idea. Most of the DNA that we have in our bodies is not ours. In fact, ours is only like 1%. 99% of it is other stuff. Viruses and bacteria and parasites and stuff like that. And it turns out that you can understand this not by, in the old ways that we would use the microbiology, we grow up stuff, say, oh look, I have a big batch of staphylococcus here. Turns out that you just look for what the DNA is, and then you get an understanding of, and except it's for the RNA, virus and so on, but anyways, complicated stuff. But you no longer have to grow things up. You can use a new technology to understand what the other bugs and things that we live with are, that we depend on. So one of the exciting ideas about this, for example, is that there are things that happen in the gut having to do with the microbiome, which travel in a backwards way up through to the brain, because everything's hooked up to the brain, and in so doing, they introduce things that are bad for you in your brain, and they give rise to disorders that make dementia more likely. So it's an exciting new idea, but we're a ways yet from A, being able to understand it, and B, then being able to do anything about it. And I'm being really careful because also one sees the joy of travel. Companies saying, hey, we will reconstitute your microbiome. Take this probiotic stuff and the particular version that we have, and you'll live forever. So there's a lot of the stuff where we don't really understand things yet. I think, though, it's opening up some important ideas. I've been amazed at some of the work that's been going on in Queen's University to look at the relationship between the microbiome and depression, for example, and ways to help change the microbiome that may help from that standpoint. Again, it's one of those really, really cool ideas, but we're not there yet. Okay. Down in front, too, when we're done there. Okay, perfect.
Hi. All right. I've been working with physical activity and aging for a little bit now. And I know that when I talk to people, I can preach physical activity and nutrition and all this stuff, but I find nothing changes unless the behavior changes. Like it can help with obesity, cancer, frailty. So what's your experience with changing behavior, and is there any kind of ways we can hope, because nothing will really change unless the behavior changes altogether.
So I think that the people who prescribe the behaviors that they want to change need to do a lot of work to understand what the structural problems are, and then we have to have a range of solutions available right from the outset, and we have to be plain spoken about it. So, for example, when it comes to exercise, one of the points I always try and make is that for an individual to start trying to exercise on their own, the data suggests that's very poor. It works best if they have a coach, and it works best if they have a playing coach. So I will virtually always recruit the spouse, or aim to, of the patient that's got dementia. The spouse has a big investment in this now, particularly if it's mild. They have a big investment in getting the exercise bit going. And I try and give people very pragmatic advice about when to exercise and how to imagine clothing works with regards to exercise. And one of the things from the exercise thing that I do is try and get people a physiotherapy assessment first, because most people get dementia or at the age which my dad would say, one's got an ass or an elbow. So you need to get the physiotherapist to make sure that you're not going to make them worse because they take up the exercise program in the wrong way and so on. I think we need a lot of on-the-ground work. It's quite an investment. Some years ago, I gave a talk about some of the things that we've done with respect to dementia prevention through exercise. And I had a young woman who worked with me then who was an Olympic athlete, and we've done work to try and make sure that the data that we're putting forward were as good as they could be, and they could be used in a way that was very powerful. And I gave a talk shortly after that to the Atlantic Physiotherapy Association, or whatever it's called. It may not be that, maybe the Maritime one, I don't know. It was a group of physiotherapists who came, and our hospital took it up straight away. No, actually our hospital didn't. There were 2 or 3 private practice groups that came up and talked to me afterwards and said, this sounds really cool and interesting, can we work with you on this? And we've done that sort of thing. I'm not sure why our public institutions don't automatically take up stuff that's been worked out here and say, this is good, let's look at this and let's evaluate. Let's not take it because Buddy said it was good. Let's get engaged with that. Let's develop solutions or let's test out the solution. Come here, let's make it better. I think we need that kind of go-get-em. The Americans got to love that. You got to love that. $2.3 billion in dementia. Let's solve it by 2020. I mean, we need a bit of that oomph here. All right. Yeah, it's all right. Keeping the place out. So I want to pay attention to the time because Dr. Monet is too polite to put a stop to it. Okay, it's 8:16 right now. Why don't we arbitrarily say that we'll stop at 8:24? How about that?
Is there a relationship or an association between having a mental illness, either early in your life or later in life, with later developing dementia?
Yes, but it's weak. So for some, it's very strong. So schizophrenia, for example, very much increases the risk of dementia writ large. Many intellectual disabilities, not really mental illnesses, increase the risk. Depression appears to increase the risk to a small extent, but to a real extent. And our evolution of this has evolved, and probably we're a victim of the precision of the words that we say depression. We mean something really, really precise. And that may be too precise for getting at what the real signal is. The general rule of thumb is if it's bad for your body, it's bad for your brain. If it's bad for your brain in one way, it's likely to be bad for your brain in other ways too. So again, I think what that means is we try and live as healthy a life as we can, including from a mental health standpoint, for its own good. It's something that should be helpful straight away, but with the expectation that these are the ways in which the prevalence of dementia will fall over time. Where the strongest evidence for the prevalence of dementia falling is with better health and social care as a general rule.
Hi there. I recently heard your colleague speak, Dr. Melissa Andrew, on age-friendly communities. So I have a two-part question. One is there any research out there that shows that age-friendly communities have lower rates of dementia? And two, how do we go about, in our own communities, changing to age-friendly communities?
So on age-friendly communities and dementia risk, if there is, I don't know it. And I was part of a group that looked at all these things very carefully and didn't come up with that. What we did, what was very striking was that in some societies, the prevalence of dementia appears to be falling. It's not falling enough that it's not going to get over the age thing, right? Like the big signal is coming from age. And when a population ages, dementia rates are going to go up. But there are some groups in which the age-adjusted prevalence rate has fallen. And the Nordic countries appear to be the place for that. And to an extent, England, but you have to squint at the data there. Canadian data also require a bit of squinting just now. We don't have access to the data done as a routine way. It's been done in other countries. But it looks like better developed countries that have good social environments are where the risk of dementia is falling. Sorry.
Okay, so we're just curious, out of curiosity, mostly what you do to keep healthy.
So I'm hoping to role model an intellectually engaged lifestyle.
And it's not really another question, but another suggestion is we work in the recreation department at one of the retirement living Shannon's locations, and one of the things we've started doing is mental aerobics, which, well, it isn't what it sounds like. It's you don't do aerobics. It's mostly word games that we've invented, like math questions, to get the residents to get their brains thinking.
So there's an emerging body of evidence which suggests that there's merit in those things. Again, there's been a lot of people being very overly precise about things here. So, for example, something drives me mad is I saw some big critique about why brain games don't work, and they said, you'll learn this attentional task, and it doesn't translate into real life. And why is that? Because we did this other attention task and didn't really generate that. Well, that's not real life. Like, real life is, you pay attention better, right? So people haven't looked at that. There's a lot of species precision that's been brought to bear with this. I think we need much better strategies to listen to the lived experience of people with dementia and record it in a way that's sufficiently precise and generalizable. We can start to answer questions like, does this translate over into the everyday lived experience?
Anyone else that I've missed on here?
See, we're so polite, just even knowing that there was a deadline come up, put us 2 minutes ahead of it. Okay, the last question here then.
I'm just curious to know can you hear me?
Yep.
If you have a positive view of aging, does that lessen the opportunity of you having dementia or Alzheimer's?
So the data on optimism and self-efficacy are sadly divided. So there is some work. If you only ask people, are you optimistic about aging, they appear to do better. If you ask them 5 other questions about the extent to which they're fit or frail or well or not, those things tend to be the more important bit. So as a general idea, people who believe themselves to be optimistic or sort of believe themselves to be looking forward to growing old and to be enjoying their aging, they're happier in general ways. And if they're actually not otherwise impaired, they'll do better than other people. But generally, it's not the positive attitude itself. It's the things that go with that. It's the experience that allows you to believe that things are going to work out. And on that happy note, and the thought that we should all believe that pretty much things are going to work out, but not so much that we don't need to be motivated to make it work better, let's end. Thanks.